So this week on campus in the UK, we're welcoming students, and it's quite tough circumstances, but nothing compared to what's happening in Gaza. We're into the 14th year of Israel's, and we must say the international community's siege of the territory. Its effects are devastating, and when we look at education, these will be long-lasting. Even if the border regime was eradicated tomorrow, the effects are almost baked in. So I'm interested in this too. Yet people in Gaza and Palestinians in general cope, and whether faintly or strongly maintain some hope. So I'm interested also in that theme too. So the first speaker we have today is Nuriya Oswald. She's an International Legal and Advocacy Director at Mezan Center for Human Rights. She's an expert in international humanitarian and human rights law, who's going to give us an overview of Israel's system of closure and its impacts on students and academics. She's also going to address the topic of apartheid and how it consists in education for Palestinians in Gaza. So I'll pass the floor to Nuriya.
Thanks very much, Mark. Thanks also, Omar, for having me, and my colleague Nazmi as well. It's a pleasure to speak with you on the panel tonight. So I'm Nuriya Oswald. I'm from a Palestinian human rights organization based and focused on the Gaza Strip. We have 3 offices there, and the vast majority of our staff are in Gaza. I'm in Geneva, having previously been based there, and now being based here and doing Al Mezan's work with the UN here, but also advocacy and legal work in Europe. So we're speaking tonight after just a few months of the recent bombardment passing. So it was 11 days, shorter than the 51 days in the 2014 summer bombardment, but it really rocked Gaza, and it rocked my colleagues. We have 40 staff who are there, and the field workers, despite really serious personal physical risks, went out every day to document the bombardment, to document the different incidents. They went to each individual site of attack, and we were aware that nowhere was safe. Not for them, not for my colleagues who sheltered in their homes. And my director was, in the middle of the 11 days, forced to evacuate. He and his family were sitting down for a meal when they received a phone call that their building would be bombed and destroyed from the Israeli military. And they rushed out, they grabbed their bags that they had already packed, and they went to a relative's house. And from there, they received the same phone call, and they went to a hospital. And over the years, it's been typical for people to try to find shelter in hospitals, on the grounds of different medical facilities, and indeed in schools as well, in particular UNRWA schools. But nowhere is safe, and Al Mezan has documented numerous attacks over the years, directed at hospitals, at schools, including when people, children, women were sheltering there. We documented the killing of 261 Palestinians in Gaza this time in the 11 days in May. That includes 60 children and 38 women. Of the total killed in Gaza, there were 21 who were killed by Palestinian rockets emanating from within Gaza, and 240 were killed by the Israeli military. 151 of those killed were civilian, and that's 58% of the people killed. And nearly 2,000 people in Gaza were injured, and that includes 643 children. There were nearly 1,000 housing units that were destroyed, and then several thousands more who were partially destroyed and damaged. And then I'm sure everyone in this call saw in the news that there were 4 residential towers that were completely brought down. 51% of the total people killed, so that's 122 people, were killed in their homes without warning. So that's including 46 children and 37 women. So again and again, we saw the targeting of civilians within the sanctity of their homes, often in the dead of night and often with no warning. And so a pattern resurfaced that was a feature of the 2014 bombardment in particular. And this was the targeting of civilians, the targeting of civilian objects, in particular homes, and the targeting of infrastructure crucial to the survival of the civilians in Gaza. The Israeli military struck 6 times as many civilian apartments within high-rise buildings in May than they did in 2014. So that's 232 residential apartments and high-rise buildings hit in May's escalation, which lasted 11 days, compared to 182 hit in 2014's conflict, and that one was roughly 7 weeks. There were also 2 universities and 4 colleges that were hit and damaged. The 2 universities were Isra University, Quds Open University, and the 4 colleges were Zaytuna College University, Palestine Technical College, Islamic Dawa College, and Gaza Community Training College. The damages required repairs, but they were overall fairly minor, and students were able to return to their classes at the start of the new term. In 2014, we documented 66 schools, 6 universities, and 52 kindergartens being hit and damaged by the Israeli military. And in several of those cases, there were people, including children, sheltering within the schools at the time that they were hit. And people shelter in schools because they have nowhere else to go. And it seems safer than their homes, than being in an open area, being on the street. And they have nowhere else to go because of the movement restrictions that are placed on Gaza by Israel. So it's Israel, that's the Israeli military that's doing the targeting, and it's the Israeli military that maintains the closure and keeps the movement restrictions in place that prohibits Palestinians in Gaza from leaving all the time, but also during these full-scale military bombardments. The closure regime has been in place in its strictest form, in its current form, since 2007. And at its roots are the movement restrictions on both people and goods. So everyone is banned across the board, but there's a humanitarian exception, it's called, which is mostly for patients. And for patients who need urgent care that is unavailable in Gaza. And part of Al Mezan's work is to support patients who are being denied or who are not receiving the requisite permit from the Israeli authorities. And we file some paperwork with the Israeli authorities, and in about 50% of the cases, without really doing much, the denial is overturned, which means there's really no basis, and certainly no security basis, for these patients to be denied the urgent care that they're seeking, that their doctors have established is not available to them in Gaza. So right now, we see about 30% rate of patients being denied this care. Last year, it was 50% at the same time. But I mean, 30% is still extremely high. These are people who have serious life-threatening illnesses and can't seek care anywhere else. And students, of course, have no right to cross to access education in the rest of the OPT, in the rest of their country. You know, the West Bank is part of occupied Palestine, and they don't have the right to use the Israeli crossing for education abroad either. Even if they have scholarships, even if they have the means to pay for their university, even if they have the money to travel, they still don't have a right to cross out of their own territory. And if they use the Egyptian crossing in Rafah, in the south of Gaza, they very likely won't ever again be allowed to use, or even for a first time, the Israeli crossing, which is far more convenient. So students are stuck deciding whether or not they take a risk and use the Egyptian crossing, which is itself often closed, which is itself, causing delays, expensive. It's dangerous, and it's a really arduous journey with numerous checkpoints and a really difficult crossing of the Sinai. But they're left either deciding between taking that route and never getting through the Israeli crossing again, or waiting and hopefully getting support and being able to cross through the Israeli side. And there are some organizations that offer support and that work on these cases. And there are some very lucky students who are able to cross through the Israeli crossing, but not many. Now, owing to Israel's effective control over Gaza, which comes from not just the movement restrictions, but really a whole comprehensive set of restrictions that it maintains through the closure, Israel assumes the legal classification of occupying power. And so as an occupying power, it has obligations under IHL, but also as a duty bearer under international human rights law. And those obligations under human rights law are commensurate with this level of control. And both Palestinian governments also maintain obligations as duty bearers under international human rights law. And of course, when Palestinian armed groups engage in military hostilities, they are also responsible for meeting the standards of the laws of war, of IHL. Now, the restrictions have devastated Gaza's economy. They prevent access to Palestinian natural resources. They violate the entire spectrum, essentially, of human rights of the population, which is now over 2 million people, including the right to health. So I already talked about patients who are trying to leave Gaza for care, but that's because the closure has pushed the healthcare system almost to collapse. These restrictions create and sustain a situation of food insecurity. These restrictions undermine the rights to water and sanitation, to an adequate standard of living, the right to live free from cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment or punishment, and numerous other rights, and in the most serious cases, of the right to life. Unemployment is about 45%. Poverty is around 53%. However, the World Bank expects the rate to increase to 64% as a result of the COVID-19 crisis. Food security, insecurity, which I mentioned, is 62%, and over 80% of Gaza's population rely on humanitarian aid. And of course, the right to education is also directly undermined by these restrictions. Schools are overcrowded, there's limited supplies, schools aren't safe. So I already mentioned the attacks on schools during the full-scale military bombardments, but these attacks also happen outside of the full-scale bombardments, for example, on the schools that are near the buffer zone that Israel has unilaterally implemented on Palestinian territory in Gaza. And so therefore, children are at risk going to school on a regular day if they are passing anywhere near the Israeli troops that have taken up permanent stations there on the perimeter. Children are traumatized and have serious mental health issues from the violence that I've just described. And there are students whose classmates don't return to the classroom after one of the military escalations. And when it comes to higher education, the universities are underfunded, resources are lacking, including in terms of materials and expertise. Of course, professors and lecturers themselves are also subject to Israel's movement restrictions. So that means they can't go to conferences abroad, trainings, workshops, seminars. And it's the same thing with visiting professors and experts as well. Tuition fees are prohibitively high for some students. And critically, the opportunities just aren't there for students upon graduating. So the vast majority of graduates are unemployed. I think it's around 65 to 70% of Gaza's population under the age of 30 are unemployed. And I'd like to see what the statistics are of young people who are employed and hold jobs relating to their areas of study. I wouldn't guess that it would be very many. Most can't travel abroad for work or to continue their studies, as I've already pointed out, and simply can't pursue meaningful professional lives. And of course, this impacts people's desire to start families, to get married when they can't provide for their families. And the circumstances that students find themselves in Gaza are not arbitrary, and they're not in place for security reasons. Part of the reason Al Mezan takes strategic litigation cases and engages with the Israeli court and justice system is to hear from the Israeli state how it supports its various policies that were challenging. And so in 2013, we challenged its movement restrictions on Gaza in support of 5 students in Gaza who had been accepted to a university in the West Bank and were being denied the permit in order to be able to travel from Gaza to the West Bank. And it was at least one of the students that had already been cleared in terms of their security background. It may have even been more than one of the students, but they were all being denied these permits because of security reasons. That was the official justification. And so when we went to court, the state was forced to say, if it wasn't security, then what was it? You know, if these students had already been cleared, then why were they being blocked for permits? And the state responded that it was because of strategic political interests of the state. It didn't say that it was because of security reasons. It said strategic political interests of Israel. And these strategic political interests of the state relate to an intentional policy that's in place by the Israeli government. These restrictions are part of this intentional policy to separate and fragment the Palestinian population. They're part of its system of oppression and part of its system in place to control and to dominate. And these conditions, the conditions in Gaza, are implemented with an intent to discriminate specifically against the Palestinian people, against the Palestinian people as an individual group, as a racial, ethnic, and national group. And doing so in order to create conditions that are favorable to a different population, to the Israeli Jewish population, over those conditions that are enforced for the Palestinian population. And this is, of course, apartheid. This is apartheid legally and factually, and I'm sure you've read Human Rights Watch's conclusions and the conclusions of Israel's 2 biggest human rights organizations on apartheid, being B'Tselem and Yesh Din as well. And apartheid is a racist policy that targets all Palestinians. So I'm not inferring that it targets just Palestinians in Gaza. It targets Palestinians in Palestine, in Israel, in the diaspora, and as refugees. But it's deployed on Palestinians in Gaza differently. It's deployed against the Palestinian population differently, depending on the other policies and aims of the Israeli government in that geographic area. And so for Gaza, that means that it's deployed through the closure and blockade, through the de-development of Gaza, through Israel's routine full-scale military bombardments, through its daily use of force in Gaza. And the inhuman acts that establish the crime of apartheid under the Apartheid Convention include education. So it says that apartheid can include the deliberate creation of conditions preventing the full development of a group or groups, in particular by denying to members basic human rights and freedoms, including the right to education. And so I'm pulling out certain criteria from Article 2 of the convention, because we're talking about education, but of course there are many more inhuman acts that are detailed in Article 2. And I would like to end by including the point that the right to education in Gaza will not be upheld, and the issues with higher education and the associated factors and barriers that I've touched on won't be ameliorated until the root causes of the violation are addressed. And those root causes, as concluded by Human Rights Watch and B'Tselem and this growing echo chamber of voices, is the persecution and apartheid against the Palestinian people, and the system of impunity that props up this apartheid regime and allows it to continue and to remain in place unchallenged.
We'll move on to our second speaker tonight. This is Dr. Nazmi Al Masri. He's an Associate Professor of Education at the Islamic University of Gaza. He gained his PhD in Manchester, in the beautiful north of England, which is where I am at the moment too, although I'm in Newcastle. Dr. Nazmi is widely published in the areas of language and pedagogy, including on the topic of teacher training and immobility. And he's going to speak today and give a first-hand account of closure in Israel's most recent aerial assault, as well as reflection on continuing sources of hope. So welcome, Dr. Nazmi. I'll hand the floor over to you.
Okay, thank you, Mark, for introducing me, and thank you, Omar, for organizing this event, and thanks for the UCUU and everyone participating. Thanks for those who are attending this session, and I hope that I will give you a glimpse of what's going on or has been going on in Gaza. First of all, as I was listening to my colleague Nuriya Oswald on her reports, most of the attention in the media and in also discussions focus on death, injuries, destructions, and physical impact of the war and the siege. Today, I will focus more on the psychological, social, and mental impact of the war based on my experience and in the Faculty of Education and as educators and academics. I will focus, as I said, on the quality, productivity, and the creativity of education, and the impact, psychological, mental impact on students and academics. Let me take you to one example. We witnessed this week, sorry about this. We witnessed this week a crisis, fuel crisis in the UK. And we have been living this for more than 15 years. It's not only 5 days or 10 days as in the UK, and we saw how difficulties the British community is facing and talking about it and considering it a big issue. And just for a few days, but about Palestinians, 15 years, and nobody knows when this crisis will stop. One of problem is a fuel as a result of siege and the blockade is preventing fuel to power stations and power plants in Gaza. I will say 2 or 3 quick examples, academic examples. I call the first one from daily life, lift panicking journeys. When academics and the students, especially at the beginning of the problem, including pregnant academic females students, suddenly get stuck and suffocated in complete darkness for unknown period. When electricity off, the lift stops and the door doesn't open and nobody knows where it stops. That's one. These are experiences that I never forget when I heard we don't see anybody in the lift, just we could hear just some students, some ladies screaming and suffocated. Another example, briefly, is I quote what a British nurse said on BBC News, what's happening in now regarding fuel crisis in the UK is an element of sheer panic. And when I looked at the dictionary of exactly what is meant by panic, and I got this Longman dictionary definition: sudden, strong feeling of fear or nervousness that makes you unable to think clearly or behave sensibly. Just a few days made the public. So what's about 15 years, we have been feeling suffering, not element, but a crisis, a chronic crisis of chronic panic as academics. If we go to another example, one colleague of mine was preparing himself or herself to deliver a lecture on culture, British culture and literature in the English language department. Suddenly he or she's ready, in fact, he was ready to deliver the lecture to her students. Suddenly the power or electricity is off. LCD is off, net is off, and mind is off, and the students will be off. So this is really a routine and daily thing that we practice and we go through. Okay, let me move from daily life to something related to the impact of war and the prolonged repetitive closures of impassable borders. And I took this impassable borders from a book I edited with two British colleagues and published last year. I'll talk about it in a minute. One of the impacts of the closures and war is unemployment of parents and the graduates. When I take parents of the students, causing considerable economic, financial difficulties to both academic and the students. For example, this year, few months ago, or a few weeks ago, the Ministry of Education announced its need to recruit about 500 school teachers. 40,000 school teachers applied. 40,000 applied and competed for 500 vacancies. And the number every year is increasing. Last year it was about, I think, about 30,000. Just teachers. And talk about engineers, talk about nurses, we can talk about IT experts and so on. Another problem or impact as a result of closure is students' families cannot pay university fees. And all universities, Palestinian universities, really depend on fees. What results we can such unemployment resulting from prolonged closures and war? Academics do not receive their salaries. We at the Islamic University of Gaza, as an example, we haven't received or we don't receive our salaries for the last 8 years. We receive only about 40% for the last 8 years. Leave apart those who are taking their pension and their after retirement. Again, it caused a brain drain among academics from Gaza, and we have to be frank and honest, yes, because academics are humans and they want to live decently and they have responsibilities to their families and obligations and duties to do towards relatives. As an academic or a doctor, you're not seen as just an academic, you are seen as a supporter. You help not only your family, your brother, your sisters, your neighbors, your relatives, who come and ask for support and help, assuming that we have high salary and good salary regularly. Another thing is job satisfaction among academics, and thus low motivation, less energy, less creativity, and low quality of academic performance. I am talking not only as academic. I was I worked as a senior manager and administrator at the Islamic University for 20 years. The last one was as a vice president for international collaboration with international affairs. So I'm talking about from as a senior manager and administrator at university, as well as an academic. Another impact of this is students themselves have been affected. If they cannot pay the fees, they feel a problem because they cannot have access to university facilities like using Moodle and taking assignments and doing assignments, downloading the handouts, etc. And this causes them a lot of problems. One of them is severe distraction. Sorry, about the severe distraction to students, leading to less attention. Less attention and working memory, stress, cognitive fatigue, leading to omissions, mental slips or lapses and mistakes, and low motivations, thus low academic achievement. And this affects the students, especially those who are accustomed to high achievement, and then they feel they don't achieve as they used to have. And this is really needs investigation to be documented and cited. All these impacts I am talking about, they are not impressionistic, rather than experience-based and reflections and based on experience and talking to students and colleagues. 7, the high unemployment rate among graduates is, according to the Palestinian Statistic Bureau, is 78 in Gaza and plus. And I doubt it. It should be more. I'm almost sure it's more than 90%. Though this is almost a recent statistics last year. And the impact of this is causing fear and feelings of hopelessness and depression, uncertainty, and worries about the future of these students. If they say, I'm going to study, like, for example, in the Faculty of Education, and they know that 40,000 students applied to 500 vacancies, why should I study if I can get a job? And job is important. I want to live decently and to be independent. I want to establish and build my own family, whether male or female. So this is really serious and affects the students when they see the high rate of unemployment. Another impact during war, students who lost their homes because homes they were bombed or damaged were forced to stay and sleep, as Nuriya said, in UNRWA schools and live in homelessness. Taking this in context of COVID-19 pandemic, and this is a picture I photoed, I disseminated on my Facebook, taken from UNRWA schools where families were living during and shortly after the war, where sanitation, whatever, including students, families, and academic families. Another impact, the psychological and mental impact of war and siege on students who lost their families or family members or colleagues and neighbors or friends or relatives. Because really it was first a class war on families, as Nuriya mentioned, gave the statistics about civilians, children, women who were killed, including some families of our students who lost all their family members, including parents. so we're not able to complete. These students suffered, and they were not able to complete. Some were not able to complete their educational journey because it's not easy. If we take the psychological impact on them, it's really serious when you lose someone suddenly, and you see how, and you are part of this destruction and part of this suffering. Some others couldn't perform academic activities well, as they suffer some mental and psychological problems, including anxiety, depression, memory problems, and speechlessness, I can call it, which I experienced it. This is due to living in a state of dispersion, conflict, instability, displacement, and homelessness. Let me give you briefly 2 examples of such psychological and mental problems, especially speechlessness. I experienced after the war. The university, the Islamic University of Gaza, decided to give 2 weeks pause after the war, so students and teachers hopefully can work and come to normal feelings and to be ready for education. And that surprised me when I asked my students, both master and PhD students, to start talking. I didn't want to lecture. I didn't want them. I know that they were not ready to lecture. I was ready, but they were not ready. But I know they were not ready, so I was ready also for their unreadiness. So I have started asking, who would like to say anything, just to say anything. I'm happy that, okay, all of you are okay. Are you okay, all? So I want to give them opportunity to release the depression, antagonism, anger, and sadness, and all the negative feelings they have went through during the war. To my surprise, in fact, to my shock, no students wanted to speak anything. I repeated once, twice, thrice, tried my best, talking in this way or another, way, encouraging them, motivating them. Please say something, anything, you feel free. I don't want to give a lecture today. We want to exchange our experiences, feelings. And the PhD students in education, nobody wanted to speak. And I felt very sad, and I felt more depressed, really. And when I spent about 20 minutes talking to them and discussing with them, encouraging, motivating them to talk, and I was hopeless. And it's the first time to happen in my life. Even though I didn't experience such case in the last 3 wars on Gaza, it was the first time. Another impact is mobility. I think Nuriya talked about this very well, but I will let me briefly talk about that. There is a separation between Gaza, West Bank, and Jerusalem, and this is really hurting to every academic and the student. And another separation is between these 3 Palestinian areas and the rest of the outside world. The first separation prevents students from joining any university they like in Palestine. One in Manchester would like, one student in Manchester would be free to study in Sheffield, or to study in Durham, or to study in Glasgow, or wherever, while this is not the case in Palestine. While also separation from these countries, from the outside world, where we cannot travel, and has many impacts. Let me briefly mention some of them. It deprived academics, researchers, students from contributing in international conferences and academic events. So we are part of this international community, but you will see later that we didn't surrender to this reality, thanks to technology that gave us the opportunity to break the siege and contribute online with our colleagues in different countries all over the world. Some students lost exchange visit opportunities that we worked hard to get these opportunities with our European partners. And at the end of the day, they couldn't travel because of restrictions on borders. Others lost the scholarships to study in Europe or UK or other countries that offer scholarships to Palestinians. Palestinian higher education institutions in Gaza couldn't and cannot host British, European, or international colleagues who are willing to come to Gaza as part of academic partnership and the projects funded by British and European governments. Unfortunately, they couldn't do that. We had to cancel several trainings or many trainings and capacity building courses for academics and administrative staff, including those part of joint projects, international projects. However, last point, or the one before the last, is resilience, hope amid war and siege on past. Yes, these are bad, hard realities, but we cannot lose hope. As I mentioned before, in Britain, they say hope is our bread and butter. That's how we live on hope. Without hope, we would have finished and vanished, but this will never happen. I assure you, this will never happen because we have very strong determination and will, and we have hope, we have resilience, and we have, as we will see, armed with hope, values of resilience and resistance to occupation, and recognizing the importance of education in achieving justice, freedom, and peace. Palestinian higher education, including specifically Islamic University of Gaza, adopted and implemented key strategies to achieve these aspirations and build seeds of hope and peace and stability in Palestine and build better future for our students. One strategy is projectizing ideas to meet funding programs, calling for proposals. And I have a lot of experiences on that, being the engineer who engineered the projectizing idea at IUG when I was the vice president, assistant to vice president, then vice president for external relations for 10 years. So every idea comes created and generated or based on context. We projectize it to suit our needs and to suit the students' aspirations and hope. Second, internationalization of higher education through a lot of activities and effort and dedication to develop academic partnerships, to apply to projects, to submit proposals with tens of European universities, and now we have partnerships with more than 100 or about 150 European partners with IUG, all of them developed during the siege, with more than 50 projects, international projects with 20 countries and hundreds of universities during the siege. The third strategy is technologizing education to network and break isolation and cross impassable borders we succeeded. As I'm just one example. The fourth strategy is humanitarian education. To take care of all types of learners, students, especially those who are with disability. And not only students. In fact, we have excellent experiences in training students and community members and the professionals on not academic, vocational, professional training to empower these persons who, especially those who were disabled or became disabled as a result of the war, whether visually or hearing disabled, or physically or mobility disabled persons, whether students or not. And IUG, during I report this, during the war, the war of 2014, rockets was launched against Gaza. I was emailing different countries, different institutions, writing proposals to establish the first program to accept the first group of Palestinian students who are completely deaf to join the university. And until now, for 7 years, IUG has been admitting, only IUG, only the Islamic University has been accepting completely deaf students university and to graduate and hopefully get decent jobs and work as they want.